Maya Chen pressed herself against the cold metal wall of the cargo bay, watching through the narrow viewport as the massive Corvani trading station grew larger ahead of their transport ship. Her fingers traced the scar across her throat, a carefully crafted fake that had saved her life for 3 long years. To everyone aboard this vessel, she was a mute human slave. Damaged goods sold cheap to work in the Outer Rim colonies. The Corvani were a proud warrior race, standing nearly 8 feet tall with thick blue-gray skin and 4 arms that could crush a human skull without effort. They had conquered 17 systems in the past century, enslaving or destroying any species they deemed inferior. Humans unfortunately fell into the inferior category. Maya had watched her homeworld burn from the cargo hold of a Corvani slave ship when she was just 19. Now at 24, she had learned to survive by being invisible, unremarkable, and most importantly, silent. Captain Thexvar entered the cargo bay, his heavy footsteps making the deck plates vibrate. His lower set of arms hung casually at his sides while his upper arms gestured as he spoke to his first officer. "The mining colony on Kepler 438b is desperate for workers," he rumbled in the guttural Corvani language. "They'll pay triple the usual rate for humans, even defective ones like this mute." Maya kept her expression blank and her eyes downcast, exactly as a broken slave should. She had perfected this act over 3 years of captivity, but inside her mind she was anything but broken. Her thoughts raced with calculations, tactical assessments, and most dangerously, plans. The Corvani believed humans were simple creatures, barely more intelligent than their own domestic animals. This misconception had become humanity's greatest hidden weapon. The first officer, a younger Corvani named Drex, glanced at Maya with disgust. "Why do we even bother with the damaged ones? She cannot speak, cannot follow complex orders. The mining foreman will complain." "Credits are credits," Thexvar replied. "Besides, humans breed quickly. Even if she dies in the mines, we've made our profit." Maya's jaw clenched almost imperceptibly. She had heard similar conversations hundreds of times, but they still filled her with cold rage. The Corvani saw humans as disposable tools, never suspecting that their simple slaves were capable of complex thought, advanced planning, or the kind of patient, long-term thinking that had once built civilizations spanning multiple star systems. The transport ship docked with a metallic clang that echoed through the cargo bay. Maya was herded out with the other human slaves, 12 men and women from various worlds, all bearing the hollow expressions of the defeated. But Maya saw something the Corvani missed. In the subtle glances between slaves, in the way they positioned themselves, in the almost invisible hand signals, she recognized the signs. Some of these humans were like her, hiding their true capabilities behind masks of submission. The Kepler 438b mining station was a nightmare of industrial machinery and harsh lighting. The air recyclers struggled to filter out the metallic dust that coated everything in a fine gray powder. Human slaves worked the dangerous lower levels while Corvani overseers monitored from safe platforms above. The work was backbreaking, the conditions lethal, and the life expectancy measured in months rather than years. Maya was assigned to Tunnel 7, the deepest and most dangerous section of the mines. The Corvani overseer, a brutal creature named Gorth, took pleasure in assigning the worst jobs to humans he deemed defective. Maya's supposed muteness made her a favorite target for his cruelty. "Mute human," Gorth bellowed, pointing to a partially collapsed section of tunnel. "Clear the debris. If you find ore, signal with the red light. If you die, signal nothing." His followers laughed at what passed for Corvani humor. Maya nodded obediently and gathered her tools, a basic laser cutter, a gravity lifter, and a small air recycler. As she walked into the tunnel, she caught the eye of another human worker, a man with graying hair and intelligent eyes hidden behind a mask of exhaustion. He made a subtle gesture with his fingers, 3 taps, then a closed fist. The old resistance code. He was asking if she was one of them. Maya responded with a slight nod, barely visible in the dim tunnel lighting. The man's eyes widened almost imperceptibly, then he turned back to his work. But Maya had seen enough. She was not alone. Deep in the tunnel, away from Corvani sensors and cameras, Maya allowed herself to truly think for the first time in months. She analyzed the mine's structure, memorized guard rotations, and began to construct a 3-dimensional map of the facility in her mind. This was what humans did better than any other species in the galaxy. They adapted, they planned, and they never stopped fighting. even when victory seemed impossible. The Corvani had conquered human space through superior technology and overwhelming numbers, but they had made one critical mistake. They believed their own propaganda about human inferiority. They saw humans as simple creatures driven by basic emotions, incapable of the complex strategic thinking that had once made humanity a formidable spacefaring civilization. As Maya worked in the darkness of Tunnel 7, she began to piece together fragments of information she had gathered over 3 years of captivity. There were others like her scattered across the galaxy, humans who had maintained their true intelligence while wearing masks of defeat. They were building something, waiting for something, preparing for something that the Corvani could never see coming. The truth was, humanity had never truly been conquered. They had simply learned to hide in plain sight, using their captors' assumptions against them. Maya had seen the signs on dozens of worlds and countless slave populations. The network was vast, patient, and invisible to Corvani detection, but Maya carried a secret that went beyond even the hidden resistance. Before her homeworld's fall, she had been Dr. Maya Chen, one of humanity's leading xenopsychologists and strategic analysts. Her knowledge of alien behavior patterns and her ability to predict large-scale social movements had made her one of the most wanted humans in Corvani space. That was why she had scarred her own throat and learned to live in silence, not because she was broken, but because she was perhaps the most dangerous human alive. As she emerged from the tunnel hours later, covered in dust and carrying a container of valuable ore, Maya made a decision that would change the course of galactic history. It was time to stop hiding. It was time to remember who she really was. 3 days after her arrival at the mining station, Maya made her first real contact with the Resistance. It happened in the meal dispensary, a cramped space where humans were allowed 15 minutes to consume their daily ration of protein paste and recycled water. The gray-haired man from Tunnel 7 sat across from her, carefully positioning his eating utensils in a specific pattern on the metal table. Maya studied the arrangement: laser cutter parallel to the table edge, water container at a 30-degree angle, protein dispenser cap pointing toward the exit. It was a message written in the subtle language the Resistance had developed over years of oppression. He was identifying himself as Node 7 of the local cell, reporting a clean security sweep, and indicating an urgent need for strategic consultation. Maya responded by adjusting her own utensils, spelling out her acknowledgement and a request for a secure meeting location. To any watching Corvani guards, they appeared to be 2 broken slaves mechanically eating their rations. In reality, they were conducting a complex tactical discussion. The man, who had introduced himself as Worker Designation 7743B, but whose real name was Thomas Nakamura, had been a colony administrator before the Corvani conquest. His analytical mind had proven invaluable in organizing the hidden network of human resistance cells throughout the mining station. But Maya could see in his eyes that he was struggling with something beyond normal operational concerns. That night, in the deeper sections of the mines where Corvani sensors could not penetrate, Maya met with Thomas and 6 other resistance members. They had carved out a small chamber behind a false wall, just large enough for their circle. Here, for the first time in 3 years, Maya could speak freely. "My name is Dr. Maya Chen," she said, her voice hoarse from years of disuse. The others stared in shock. They had assumed she was genuinely mute. "Before the conquest, I worked with the Colonial Defense Initiative as a xenopsychological analyst. I specialized in predicting alien behavioral patterns and developing counter-strategies for non-human threats." Thomas leaned forward, his eyes widening. "Chen? You mean the Chen who wrote the Corvani Predictive Behavioral Matrix? The report that warned Earth about the invasion 3 months before it happened?" Maya nodded grimly. "The same report that was ignored by politicians who believed diplomacy could solve everything. I've spent the last 3 years studying our captors from the inside, learning their weaknesses and mapping their psychological blind spots. The situation is both worse and better than you might think." She began to explain what she had discovered. The Corvani Empire was indeed vast and powerful, but it was also rigid, hierarchical, and surprisingly fragile. Their entire social structure depended on maintaining strict dominance relationships. They literally could not conceive of an inferior species becoming a genuine threat. This cognitive limitation was so fundamental to their psychology that they would ignore overwhelming evidence rather than admit they had been wrong about human capabilities. "But here's what you need to understand," Maya continued, her voice growing more intense. The resistance movement isn't just local to this station or even this system. I've seen the signs on every world I've visited. We're talking about a coordinated network spanning hundreds of systems, involving millions of humans. Someone has been organizing this on a galactic scale. Sarah Kim, a former Starship engineer who now worked the processing plant, spoke up. We know about other cells, but communication is almost impossible. How could anyone coordinate something that large? Maya smiled for the first time in years. Because humans are better at certain types of thinking than Corvani give us credit for. We excel at pattern recognition, long-term planning, and adaptive problem-solving. While the Corvani see us as simple creatures acting on instinct, we've been building something they can't even detect. She went on to explain her observations about the subtle signs of resistance coordination, the way certain supply shipments always seemed to contain specific items that could be used for communication or sabotage. The fact that resistance cells on different worlds were developing identical tactical approaches without any apparent contact. The careful placement of humans with useful skills in strategic positions throughout the Empire. Someone is using the Corvani slave distribution system against them, Maya realized as she spoke. They're deliberately allowing certain humans to be captured and placed in key locations. This isn't random resistance, this is a carefully orchestrated campaign that's been building for years. Thomas pulled out a small data pad he had constructed from salvaged mining equipment. We've been tracking patterns in the ore shipments, guard rotations, and supply deliveries. Look at this. He showed her a complex chart of seemingly random data points. At first we thought these were just bureaucratic inefficiencies. But if you look at them as intentional signals, Maya studied the data, her trained mind quickly recognizing the underlying pattern. These aren't random at all. Someone is using the shipment schedules to coordinate activities across multiple systems. The timing intervals, the quantity variations, even the types of ore being prioritized. It's all a coded message system. The implications were staggering. If Maya was right, the human resistance had evolved far beyond isolated cells of desperate slaves. It had become a sophisticated intelligence network operating under the very noses of their captors. But this revelation also brought terrifying questions. Who was coordinating this massive operation? How had they remained hidden for so long? And most importantly, what was the ultimate goal? Marcus Torres, a former military officer who had been enslaved after the conquest of Alpha Centauri, leaned back against the tunnel wall. If this is true, then we're part of something much bigger than we imagined. But why hasn't anyone made contact with us directly? Why are we still sitting here mining ore instead of fighting? Maya had been wondering the same thing. I think they're waiting for something specific. A triggering event or perhaps a critical mass of coordination points. The Corvani have superior technology and overwhelming numbers. A conventional rebellion would be suicide. But if you could coordinate simultaneous actions across their entire empire, you could create system-wide chaos, Sarah finished. Overwhelm their ability to respond effectively. Exactly. But such an operation would require precise timing and perfect intelligence about Corvani command structures. It would need someone who understands their psychology well enough to predict their responses. As Maya spoke, she began to understand why she had been allowed to remain hidden for 3 years. Her expertise in Corvani psychology wasn't just useful, it was essential. Somewhere out there, the architects of this massive resistance operation had been protecting her, moving her from location to location, keeping her safe until the moment when her knowledge would be needed. The meeting ended with Maya agreeing to analyze the coded shipment data more thoroughly and to begin mapping the psychological profiles of the local Corvani command structure. But as the others slipped away into the darkness of the tunnels, Maya remained behind, her mind racing with the full implications of what she had discovered. For 3 years, she had thought she was just trying to survive. Now she realized she had been positioned at the center of what might be the largest covert operation in galactic history. The question was no longer whether humanity would fight back against the Corvani Empire. The question was when the signal would come to begin the war that would determine the future of both species. In the distance, she could hear the rumble of mining equipment and the harsh voices of Corvani overseers. But for the first time since her homeworld burned, Maya Chen felt something she had almost forgotten: hope. The discovery came by accident, which made it all the more dangerous. Maya was deep in Tunnel 7, analyzing ore samples for the Resistance's coded communication system, when her laser cutter malfunctioned and burned through the tunnel wall into a hidden chamber beyond. The space was small, no larger than a storage closet, but what she found inside changed everything she thought she knew about the Corvani Empire. Ancient symbols covered the walls, not Corvani script, but something far older. The markings were carved deep into the rock, weathered by time but still clearly visible. Maya's training in xenoarchaeology, a minor specialty she had pursued alongside her psychological studies, allowed her to recognize the style immediately. These symbols belonged to the architects, the mysterious race that had vanished from the galaxy over 1,000,000 years ago, leaving behind only ruins and unanswered questions. But that wasn't the most shocking discovery. Scattered on the floor of the chamber were dozens of small crystalline devices, each about the size of a human thumb. Maya picked one up carefully and it immediately began to glow with a soft blue light. The moment it touched her skin, information flooded her mind. Not words or images, but pure knowledge downloaded directly into her consciousness. The truth hit her like a physical blow. The architects hadn't vanished. They had been systematically exterminated by the Corvani Empire over the course of 100,000 years. The Corvani had built their entire civilization on architect technology, stealing advanced weapons, faster than light travel, and terraforming capabilities from the ruins of their victims. Worse yet, this wasn't the first time the Corvani had committed genocide on a galactic scale. 17 other spacefaring civilizations had been completely destroyed, their technologies absorbed, their cultures erased from history. Maya staggered back from the crystal, her mind reeling from the implications. The Corvani weren't just conquerors, they were parasites who had spent millennia consuming other civilizations to fuel their expansion. Humanity wasn't their first victim. They were simply the latest in a long line of species marked for extinction. But the crystal contained more than just historical revelations. It held detailed technical specifications for architect technology that the Corvani had never fully understood. Weapon systems, defensive networks, and most importantly, a communication array that could instantly connect any point in the galaxy. The architects had built a vast network of these arrays before their destruction, hidden throughout the galaxy in locations the Corvani had never found. Maya realized with growing excitement that this was what the human resistance had been searching for without even knowing it. The coded shipment communications, the careful positioning of resistance cells, the patient building of a galactic network, it had all been preparation for the moment when humanity could access architect technology and turn the Corvani's own stolen weapons against them. She quickly gathered as many crystals as she could, carry and sealed the chamber entrance. But as she emerged from the tunnel, she found herself face to face with Overseer Gorth and 2 heavily armed Corvani guards. Their massive forms blocked her path and their eyes glowed with suspicious anger. "Mute human," Gorth rumbled, his upper arms folded while his lower arms rested on the energy weapons at his belt. "You have been in Tunnel 7 for 6 hours. Worker efficiency requirements mandate completion in 4 hours maximum. Explain delay." Maya pointed to her throat and opened her mouth silently, maintaining her mute charade. But she could see that Gorth was no longer satisfied with simple explanations. His suspicious nature, typical of Corvani psychology, had been triggered by something, perhaps her extended absence, or maybe reports from other overseers about suspicious human behavior. "Search her," Gorth ordered. The guards moved forward with military precision, their forearms making quick work of checking Maya's tool belt and work clothing. She had hidden the architect crystals inside the gravity lifter's power core, betting that the Corvani would be reluctant to disassemble expensive mining equipment without clear evidence of wrongdoing. The search revealed nothing, but Gorth's suspicion remained. "This human shows signs of deception behavior," he announced to his guards. "Increased heart rate, elevated stress hormones, micro-expressions indicating cognitive activity beyond normal slave parameters. Recommend enhanced monitoring protocols." Maya's blood ran cold. The Corvani had always underestimated human intelligence, but their biological monitoring systems were extremely sophisticated. If they began paying attention to subtle physiological signs, they might start noticing that many of their simple human slaves were displaying patterns of complex thought. She forced herself to remain calm, slowing her breathing and relaxing her facial muscles. Years of practice at hiding her true nature came to her aid as she projected the mental state of a confused frightened slave who didn't understand why she was being questioned. One of the guards, a younger Corvani named Vex, studied his scanner readings. Stress levels decreasing to normal slave parameters, Overseer. Heart rate and neural activity consistent with fear response to authority figures. No indication of deception or advanced cognition. Gorth stared at Maya for a long moment, his 4 eyes boring into her with predatory intensity. Finally, he stepped aside. Continue work assignment, but you will be monitored. Any further irregularities will result in disciplinary action. As Maya walked away, she could feel their eyes following her. The situation had become infinitely more dangerous. If the Corvani were beginning to pay attention to human behavior patterns, the entire resistance network could be compromised. Worse yet, she now carried information that could change the course of the war, but she had no safe way to share it with the other resistance members. That night, Maya made a desperate decision. Using techniques she had learned from studying Corvani psychology, she began to deliberately trigger the Overseer's assumptions about human nature. She made herself appear more broken, more defeated, more obviously inferior than ever before. She stumbled frequently, seemed confused by simple instructions, and displayed the kind of learned helplessness that Corvani psychology expected from long-term slaves. The strategy worked almost too well. Within days, Overseer Gorth had dismissed her as a genuine threat and assigned her to the most dangerous work details, the kind reserved for slaves who were expected to die soon anyway. But this gave Maya exactly what she needed: access to the deepest parts of the mine, where Corvani surveillance was minimal and resistance members could gather without detection. In the hidden chamber behind the false wall, Maya shared her discovery with the resistance cell. The revelation about architect technology and the true history of Corvani expansion sent shockwaves through the group. Thomas Nakamura sat in stunned silence as Maya explained the implications. If this is true, he finally said, then every human in the galaxy needs to know. The Corvani aren't just occupying our worlds, they're planning to exterminate our entire species. Sarah Kim, ever practical, focused on the technological aspects. These architect communication arrays, if we could access them, we could coordinate resistance activities across the entire galaxy in real time. No more coded shipment schedules or waiting months for messages to travel between systems. But Marcus Torres raised the question that terrified them all. How do we know the resistance leadership doesn't already know about this? How do we know we're not being set up as expendable pawns in someone else's game? Maya had been wondering the same thing. The careful coordination of resistance activities, the strategic placement of humans throughout the Empire, the patient building of a galactic network, it all suggested a level of planning and knowledge that went far beyond what isolated slave populations should have been able to achieve. As she looked around the circle at the faces of her fellow resistance members, Maya realized that they were about to cross a line from which there would be no return. The information in the architect crystals was too valuable to ignore, but using it would inevitably expose the existence of the resistance to Corvani attention. The war was coming whether they were ready or not. The only question was whether humanity would fight it as scattered slaves or as a united force armed with the weapons of the galaxy's previous victims. The breakthrough came when Maya finally deciphered the activation sequence for the architect communication crystals. Working in the hidden chamber during the night shifts, she had spent weeks analyzing the downloaded information, cross-referencing it with her knowledge of Corvani technology and human neural patterns. The moment she made the connection, everything changed. The activation wasn't based on Corvani-style hierarchical commands or mechanical interfaces. Instead, it required something the Corvani psychology simply couldn't comprehend: collaborative consciousness. The architect technology responded to multiple minds working in perfect harmony, sharing thoughts and intentions without the rigid dominant structures that defined Corvani society. "It's brilliant," Maya whispered to Thomas as they crouched over the glowing crystal in their secret chamber. The Corvani could never use this technology effectively because they can't think beyond dominance and submission. But humans, we evolved as cooperative hunters, collaborative builders. We can form genuine partnerships. When they activated the crystal array using the linked consciousness of all 7 resistance members, the result was beyond anything Maya had imagined. Suddenly, she wasn't just connected to her local cell. Her awareness expanded to encompass thousands of resistance nodes scattered across hundreds of worlds. The network she had suspected existed was revealed in all its staggering complexity. And at the center of it all was a mind she recognized immediately, even though she hadn't heard from him in over 4 years. "Hello, Maya," came the familiar mental voice of Dr. Elena Vasquez, Maya's former colleague from the Colonial Defense Initiative. "We've been waiting for you to find your way to us." The psychic connection allowed for instant communication across vast distances, but more than that, it enabled the sharing of complex information at the speed of thought. In moments, Maya understood the true scope of what humanity had been building during their years of apparent defeat. The resistance wasn't just a network of escaped slaves and hidden fighters. It was a carefully orchestrated strategy that had been planned before the first Corvani ship ever reached human space. Elena and a small group of far-sighted leaders had seen the invasion coming and had begun preparing for a war that would be fought not with conventional weapons, but with humanity's greatest strength, their ability to adapt, learn, and work together in ways that alien psychology couldn't predict or counter. "We let them capture our worlds," Elena explained through the crystal link. "We let them enslave our people because we knew that dispersing humanity throughout their empire would give us access to their infrastructure, their technology, and most importantly, their blind spots. Every human they enslaved became a potential intelligence asset. Every world they conquered became a staging ground for our eventual counterattack." Maya felt a mixture of awe and horror as the full picture became clear. "You're telling me that billions of humans have been suffering in slavery for years as part of a planned strategy?" "I'm telling you that billions of humans chose to suffer in slavery to ensure that humanity would survive," Elena replied. "Every resistance member knew the stakes. We could fight conventionally and face complete extinction, or we could sacrifice everything for a chance at ultimate victory." Through the crystal network, Maya began to understand the true genius of the human resistance strategy. While the Corvani had been congratulating themselves on their easy conquest, humans had been systematically infiltrating every level of their society. Human slaves worked in their weapons factories, learning to sabotage critical systems. Human servants in government buildings overheard strategic discussions and military plans. Human miners like Maya's cell had been positioned to discover and exploit the architect technology that the Corvani themselves didn't fully understand. But the most devastating revelation was yet to come. Sarah Kim, connected to the network through the crystal array, suddenly gasped in shock. The shipment schedules, the placement patterns, the timing of slave distributions, it's not just communication. You've been using the Corvani transportation system to position weapons throughout their empire. Elena's mental presence radiated grim satisfaction. Modified architect technology, disguised as mining equipment and industrial machinery. The Corvani have been helping us deploy weapons of mass destruction to every major population center in their empire. They've been so confident in their superiority that they never bothered to deeply scan cargo that appeared to be their own technology. Marcus Torres, his military mind immediately grasping the implications, connected the final pieces. The simultaneous activation command. "You're not planning a rebellion. You're planning a decapitation strike that will cripple their entire civilization in a single coordinated attack." "Not cripple," Elena corrected. "Destroy. The Corvani have spent 100,000 years committing genocide. They've erased 17 civilizations from existence and we're planning to do the same to humanity. This ends now and it ends permanently." Maya felt the cold logic of the plan, but also its terrible necessity. The architect crystals had shown her the true history of Corvani expansion, an endless cycle of conquest, enslavement, and extinction that had consumed countless species. Humanity wasn't fighting for freedom. They were fighting for the right to exist in a galaxy where the Corvani Empire continued to grow. But what truly amazed her was how perfectly the strategy exploited the weaknesses in Corvani psychology. Their rigid hierarchical thinking made them unable to conceive of slaves as genuine threats. Their dominance-based social structure prevented them from recognizing collaborative intelligence when they saw it. Their assumption of superiority blinded them to the possibility that their inferior subjects might be more adaptable and creative than they were. "There's something else," Elena continued. "The architect technology doesn't just give us weapons and communication. It gives us something the Corvani can never truly possess, the ability to learn and evolve rapidly. Every architect crystal contains the accumulated knowledge of species that the Corvani destroyed. We're not just fighting with human ingenuity anymore. We're fighting with the combined wisdom of every civilization the Corvani have ever murdered. Through the crystal network, Maya could feel the presence of thousands of human minds across the galaxy, all connected, all sharing information and resources in real time. It was a form of collective intelligence that no single species had ever achieved, made possible by humanity's unique ability to form genuine partnerships combined with architect technology, designed for collaborative use. The Corvani had thought they were conquering another primitive species. Instead, they had given humanity access to their infrastructure and inadvertently triggered the evolution of a completely new form of sentient civilization, one specifically designed to be their perfect nemesis. When does the attack begin? Maya asked, though part of her already knew the answer. 72 hours from now, Elena replied. Every major Corvani military installation, government center, and population hub will be destroyed simultaneously. But that's only the beginning. The real war starts afterward, when we use their own transportation networks and communication systems to coordinate the liberation of every human slave in the galaxy. As the crystal connection faded and Maya returned to her individual consciousness, she realized that her 3 years of silence were about to end in the most dramatic way possible. Soon every Corvani in the galaxy would learn that they had fatally underestimated the quiet species they had dismissed as inferior. The humans they had enslaved weren't broken victims. They were the architects of the most sophisticated military operation in galactic history, and they were about to demonstrate exactly why humanity had become the dominant species on every world they had ever touched. The silence was ending. The war was beginning, and the Corvani Empire was about to discover that sometimes the prey species turns out to be the predator. 60 hours before the coordinated strike, everything began to unravel. Maya was monitoring Corvani communications from her position in Tunnel 7 when she detected an unexpected pattern in the security frequencies. High-ranking Corvani officers across multiple systems were reporting anomalous slave behavior and requesting enhanced monitoring protocols. The reports were scattered and seemingly unrelated, but Maya's trained eye recognized the emerging pattern immediately. Somewhere in the galaxy, a resistance cell had been compromised. Through the Architect Crystal Network, Maya reached out to Elena in the Central Coordination Hub. The response she received sent ice through her veins. 3 major nodes had gone dark in the past 6 hours. Resistance cells on Corvani military worlds that had been preparing to disable key weapons installations. Worse yet, the pattern of discovery suggested that the Corvani weren't just stumbling across isolated incidents. They were conducting a systematic investigation. Commander Zexthor of the Corvani Intelligence Division has been promoted to Imperial Security Coordinator. Elena's voice echoed through the crystal link, tinged with a concern that Maya had never heard from her before. Our intelligence suggests he's been studying human behavioral patterns for months. He may have developed countermeasures to our infiltration tactics. Maya's mind raced through the implications. Zexthor was known throughout the resistance networks as one of the most dangerous Corvani commanders. A tactical genius whose psychological profiles showed unusual adaptability for his species. If he had been put in charge of empire-wide security, their carefully planned operation was in serious jeopardy. Can we accelerate the timeline? Maya asked through the crystal connection. We're trying, but the weapons require 48 hours to reach full activation. If we strike too early, we'll destroy some targets but leave their military command structure intact. The Corvani would have time to organize a response and hunt down every remaining resistance member in the galaxy. Maya could feel the tension radiating through the network as thousands of human minds grappled with an impossible choice. Launch the attack prematurely and risk failure, or maintain the schedule and hope that Zexthor's investigation wouldn't uncover enough evidence to compromise the entire operation. The decision was made for them 6 hours later. Maya was in the middle of her shift when alarms began blaring throughout the mining station. Corvani guards rushed through the tunnels, their weapons powered and ready. Overseer Gorth's voice boomed over the communication system, speaking in the harsh military dialect reserved for emergency situations. All human slaves report to designated assembly areas immediately. Failure to comply will result in immediate termination. This is not a drill. Through the crystal network, Maya could feel the panic spreading across the galaxy as similar announcements were made on hundreds of worlds simultaneously. Zexthor hadn't just discovered isolated resistance cells. He had uncovered enough evidence to trigger a empire-wide security lockdown. Maya reached out to her local cell through subtle hand signals as they were herded into the main assembly area with over 300 other human slaves. Thomas's eyes met hers briefly, and she could see the same realization in his expression. They were about to be interrogated using advanced Corvani techniques that could detect signs of organized resistance activity. The interrogation began with Commander Vex Natal, the local security chief, addressing the assembled humans with cold efficiency. Intelligence reports indicate the presence of coordinated resistance activities among slave populations. All subjects will be subjected to enhanced psychological scanning. Those found to be involved in seditious activities will be executed immediately. Maya watched in horror as the first group of humans was led to scanning stations equipped with sophisticated neural analysis equipment. The Corvani technology could detect patterns of deception, elevated stress responses, and most dangerously, evidence of recent memory modification or collaborative thinking patterns. 3 resistance members were identified and executed within the first hour. Through the crystal network, Maya could feel similar scenes playing out across the galaxy. The Corvani had developed a systematic approach to identifying resistance members by looking for the psychological signatures of organized resistance activity. They were targeting humans who showed signs of advanced planning, collaborative thinking, or knowledge beyond what isolated slaves should possess. But Maya began to notice something that gave her hope. The Corvani scanning technology was incredibly sophisticated, but it was designed around their own psychological assumptions. They were looking for dominance hierarchies, command structures, and the kind of rigid organizational patterns that characterized their own military forces. The resistance, however, was built on entirely different principles. The collaborative consciousness enabled by architect technology created mental patterns that Corvani psychology couldn't easily recognize. Humans who were connected through the crystal network didn't think like soldiers following orders. They thought like interconnected neurons in a vast collective intelligence. Maya made a desperate decision. As her group was called forward for scanning, she opened her mind completely to the crystal network, allowing her consciousness to merge with the thousands of connected human minds across the galaxy. The effect was immediate and overwhelming. Her individual thoughts dissolved into a flowing stream of collective intelligence that spanned multiple star systems. When the Corvani scanners analyzed her brain patterns, they found something completely outside their understanding. Instead of detecting the clear evidence of resistance activity they expected, they found mental patterns that appeared to be those of a severely damaged slave whose consciousness had fragmented under prolonged trauma. The scanning technician, a young Corvani named Dexavar, studied his readings with confusion. Neural patterns indicate severe psychological trauma with associated dissociative episodes. Subject appears to have retreated into a state of mental disconnection from reality. No evidence of organized thought or resistance activity. Maya was released back into the general population, but she maintained her connection to the collective consciousness. Through the network, she could feel other resistance members across the galaxy discovering the same escape strategy. By fully embracing the collaborative intelligence that architect technology made possible, they could hide their individual resistance activities within a form of consciousness that Corvani technology couldn't analyze. But the breakthrough came with a terrible cost. Maintaining full connection to the collective network required abandoning individual identity almost completely. Maya could feel her sense of self dissolving as her mind merged with thousands of others. She was becoming something new, not just human, but part of a hybrid consciousness that combined human creativity with architect technology. Through the vast network, Maya became aware of the full scope of Zexthor's investigation. The Corvani commander had indeed identified the existence of organized human resistance, but he had made a critical error. He assumed that human rebellion would follow the same patterns as Corvani military organization. Clear chains of command, identifiable leadership structures, and centralized planning. Instead, he was facing something that had never existed before in galactic history. A truly distributed intelligence that could adapt and evolve faster than any investigation could track it. Every time the Corvani identified and eliminated one resistance cell, the network simply reformed around the loss, sharing knowledge and resources through quantum-entangled crystal arrays that operated faster than light-speed communication. As Maya's individual consciousness dissolved into the collective, she realized that the war had already begun. Not the physical war of weapons and ships that was still 36 hours away, but a far more fundamental conflict between two completely different forms of intelligence. The Corvani represented the ultimate evolution of hierarchical, dominance-based consciousness. They had built their empire through superior individual strength and rigid social structures. Humanity, enhanced by architect technology, had become something entirely new, a collaborative consciousness that could think and act with the combined intelligence of an entire species while maintaining the creativity and adaptability that had made humans successful on countless worlds. The question was no longer whether humanity could defeat the Corvani Empire. The question was whether individual humans would still exist when the war was over, or whether they would be transformed into something that transcended the boundaries between separate minds. As the hours ticked down toward the coordinated strike, Maya felt herself becoming part of something vast and terrible and wonderful, a new form of life that the galaxy had never seen. Born from the merger of human consciousness and the technological legacy of every species the Corvani had ever destroyed. The silence was ending, but what would speak in its place would be unlike anything that had ever existed before. The attack began at exactly RO347 Standard Galactic Time, and Maya experienced it through the consciousness of 17 million humans simultaneously. Across the galaxy, in weapons factories on Corvani military worlds, mining equipment that had sat dormant for months suddenly activated, but instead of extracting ore, the modified architect technology began broadcasting devastating energy pulses that turned every major Corvani installation into a weapon aimed at itself. Battleships in orbital shipyards found their own construction equipment, tearing them apart from the inside. Command centers discovered that their communication arrays had been converted into focused beam weapons, targeting their own control systems. Maya felt each explosion as if it were happening inside her own mind, but multiplied across thousands of locations throughout Corvani space. The collective consciousness that humanity had become allowed her to experience the simultaneous destruction of the entire Corvani military infrastructure with perfect clarity. Commander Zexthor's flagship, the Imperial Dominion, was one of the first targets destroyed. Maya watched through the eyes of a human slave in the engine room as the modified mining equipment revealed its true purpose. The Corvani commander had just enough time to understand what was happening before his ship became an expanding ball of superheated plasma. But the physical destruction was only the beginning. As Corvani command structures collapsed across the galaxy, something far more profound was taking place. The Architect Crystal Network wasn't just coordinating an attack, it was facilitating the birth of a new form of consciousness that spanned the entire galaxy. Maya could feel her individual identity becoming part of something vast and incomprehensible. Through the network, she was simultaneously a mining slave on Kepler 438b, a factory worker on the Corvani homeworld, a servant in the Imperial Palace, and thousands of other humans scattered across hundreds of worlds. The boundaries between separate minds had dissolved completely, replaced by a flowing stream of shared consciousness that could process information and make decisions at speeds no individual intelligence could match. The Corvani response was swift but disorganized. Fleet Admiral Korthvex, the highest-ranking survivor of the initial attack, attempted to coordinate a counter-offensive from his command ship in the Outer Rim. His tactical displays showed the impossible scope of the human rebellion. Simultaneous attacks on over 3,000 major installations, all perfectly coordinated despite being separated by vast distances. How are they communicating? He demanded of his intelligence officers. Our monitoring stations show no subspace transmissions, no quantum entanglement signatures, nothing that could coordinate an operation of this magnitude. The answer came from an unexpected source. Dr. Velthan, the Corvani Empire's leading expert on architect technology, stumbled into the command center with devastating news. Admiral, the humans have accessed the architect consciousness network. They're using quantum crystalline matrices that operate outside our understanding of physics. They're not just communicating, they're thinking as a single entity with millions of individual processing nodes. Admiral Korthvex stared at the tactical displays showing the systematic destruction of his empire. You're telling me that our slaves have become a collective intelligence? Not just any collective intelligence, Dr. Velthan replied. They've achieved something the architects themselves never managed. Perfect integration of individual creativity with networked consciousness. Every human in their network retains their personal abilities while contributing to a vast, distributed mind that can solve problems and adapt strategies faster than our most advanced computers. Through the crystal network, Maya became aware of this conversation as it happened. The collective consciousness had placed operatives in every major Corvani facility, and nothing the remaining commanders said or did escaped their attention. The humans weren't just fighting a war, they were thinking it into existence moment by moment, adapting their strategies in real time, based on information gathered from millions of sources. But Maya also sensed something that troubled the collective consciousness. The Corvani weren't just retreating, they were implementing something called Protocol Omega, a final solution that had been developed for use against species that proved impossible to control. Through the network, Maya felt the collective mind analyze the implications with terrifying speed. Protocol Omega was a planetary sterilization program designed to render entire worlds uninhabitable. If the Corvani couldn't maintain their empire, they would ensure that no other species could challenge them again. They were preparing to destroy every world containing significant human populations, including Earth itself. The collective consciousness reached a decision in microseconds. The war escalated from strategic strikes to total galactic warfare. Across Corvani space, human slaves revealed their true nature for the first time. Maintenance workers in critical facilities simultaneously sabotaged life support systems. Servants in government buildings activated hidden weapons that eliminated entire leadership hierarchies in moments. Even humans in the most secure prisons found ways to escape and join the expanding network of liberated minds. Maya experienced the liberation of Earth through the consciousness of humans who had been hiding in underground resistance cells for years. As Corvani orbital installations fell silent, the scattered survivors of humanity's original civilization emerged from hiding to find a world transformed. The collective network provided them with architect technology that could rebuild their devastated planet in months rather than decades. But the most profound change was happening to humanity itself. As more humans joined the crystal network, the collective consciousness grew exponentially more powerful. They weren't just sharing information, they were evolving new forms of thought that no individual mind could have conceived. Problem-solving abilities that had once required teams of specialists could now be accomplished by any human connected to the network. Maya found herself at the center of this transformation, her expertise in xenopsychology, making her a crucial node in understanding how the collective consciousness could interface with alien forms of intelligence. Through her, the network began to comprehend the full scope of what they were becoming. They were no longer Homo sapiens as the species had existed for millennia. They were becoming something new, a distributed intelligence that combined the best aspects of individual human creativity with the processing power of a galactic-scale computer network. Every human in the network retained their personality and memories while contributing to a vast, collective mind that could think about problems on scales no individual consciousness could grasp. Admiral Korthvex's final transmission was received by the collective consciousness with something approaching pity. To any Corvani forces receiving this message, retreat to the Outer Rim territories and await further orders. The core worlds are lost, the humans have become something we cannot fight. But the collective mind had already moved beyond fighting. They were reshaping the galaxy itself, using architect technology to establish new forms of civilization based on cooperative consciousness rather than dominance hierarchies. Worlds that had been strip-mined by Corvani exploitation were being restored to their original ecological balance. Species that had been enslaved for generations were being liberated and offered the choice to join the expanding network of collective intelligence. Maya felt herself becoming part of something that transcended the boundaries of species, planet, or even individual existence. The silence that had protected her for so long was ending. But what emerged in its place was a voice that spoke for every consciousness in the galaxy. A symphony of minds working together to build something that had never existed before. The war was ending, but the transformation of galactic civilization was just beginning. Humanity had broken their silence, and the sound that emerged would reshape the universe itself. 1 year after the liberation, Maya stood on the observation deck of New Geneva Station, watching as the last Corvani diplomatic vessel prepared to depart human space forever. But she wasn't standing there alone. Through the crystal network, she experienced this moment through the consciousness of millions of humans across the galaxy, each adding their own perspective to the collective understanding of what they had accomplished. The Corvani delegation that emerged from the vessel was unlike any Maya had ever seen. Gone was the arrogant posture of a dominant species. These survivors moved with the careful respect of beings who had learned that they were not the apex predators they had believed themselves to be. Ambassador Kethvar, one of the few high-ranking Corvani to survive the initial strikes, approached the human negotiation team with something unprecedented in Corvani behavior: humility. "The terms of the treaty are acceptable to the remaining Corvani territories," he announced, his forearms held in the traditional gesture of submission. "We will withdraw to the designated systems in the Outer Rim, and will not interfere with human expansion or the liberation of other species." Maya nodded, though she knew that Kethvar was actually addressing the collective consciousness rather than any individual human. Through the network, 17 million human minds considered his words simultaneously, analyzing not just the literal meaning but the psychological subtext, the cultural implications, and the strategic ramifications for galactic civilization. The collective response came through Maya's voice, but it carried the wisdom of the entire human network. "The treaty is accepted, but understand that this galaxy now operates on principles that your species has never encountered. Cooperation replaces domination. Shared consciousness replaces isolated hierarchy. Any attempt to return to your previous methods of expansion will be detected and stopped before it can begin." As the Corvani vessel departed, Maya felt a wave of complex emotions flow through the collective network. Relief at the end of hostilities mixed with profound sadness for the suffering that had been necessary to reach this point. But underlying everything was a sense of purpose that went far beyond the simple defeat of an enemy. Through the crystal network, Maya could perceive the ongoing transformation of galactic civilization. Worlds that had been devastated by Corvani exploitation were being restored, using architect technology guided by human collective consciousness. Species that had been enslaved for generations were being offered the choice to join the expanding network of cooperative intelligence. The results were extraordinary. The Zelathi, a species of aquatic philosophers who had been enslaved for their ability to perform complex calculations, discovered that joining the human network enhanced their natural mathematical abilities beyond anything they had previously imagined. The Threnodi, whose artistic talents had been exploited by Corvani cultural industries, found that connection to millions of human minds allowed them to create works of beauty that transcended the boundaries of individual species. But perhaps most remarkably, some Corvani individuals had chosen to undergo the consciousness integration process themselves. The psychological barriers that had made their species incapable of genuine cooperation could be overcome through careful modification of their neural patterns using architect technology. These voluntary converts became bridges between the old galactic order and the new cooperative civilization that humanity was building. Maya watched through the network as former slave. Worlds were transformed into centers of learning and creativity. Earth itself had become something unrecognizable from the planet that had fallen to Corvani invasion 5 years earlier. Cities rose from the ashes of destruction, but they were unlike anything humanity had built before. Organic structures that grew according to the collective will of their inhabitants, powered by architect technology that drew energy directly from the quantum fabric of space. The mining station where Maya had hidden for 3 years was now a memorial and research center dedicated to understanding the transformation of consciousness. Visitors came from across the galaxy to study how a species could evolve from individual intelligence to collective consciousness while retaining the creativity and adaptability that made each mind unique. But Maya knew that the most profound changes were still ahead. Through the crystal network, she could feel the collective consciousness grappling with questions that no species had ever faced before. What responsibilities did a galactic-scale intelligence have to other forms of life? How could they ensure that their cooperative civilization didn't become another form of tyranny for species that chose not to join the network? The answers were emerging slowly, through the combined wisdom of millions of minds working together. The collective consciousness was developing new forms of ethics and governance based on voluntary participation and mutual benefit rather than dominance and submission. They were building a civilization that could accommodate both individual creativity and collective action, both personal choice and shared responsibility. Maya felt her individual identity shifting within the network, becoming something richer and more complex than she had ever been as a single human mind. Her expertise in xenopsychology had evolved into something unprecedented, an understanding of consciousness itself that allowed her to help other species integrate with the collective network while maintaining their unique cultural perspectives. As she watched the stars through the observation deck, Maya realized that her 3 years of silence had ended in the most profound way possible. She was no longer just Maya Chen, the xenopsychologist who had pretended to be mute to survive Corvani slavery. She was part of a voice that spoke for an entire galaxy, a collective consciousness that was teaching the universe new ways to think about cooperation, creativity, and the infinite potential of minds working together. The transformation was spreading beyond the borders of what had once been Corvani space. Reports came daily of other species requesting contact with the human collective, wanting to learn about these new forms of consciousness and cooperation. Some joined the network directly, while others chose to remain independent while adopting the cooperative principles that humanity had demonstrated. Maya smiled as she felt the collective consciousness consider the future. They were not conquerors like the Corvani had been. They were gardeners, cultivating new forms of civilization that could flourish across the galaxy. They were teachers, showing other species that there were alternatives to the endless cycles of dominance and submission that had characterized galactic politics for millions of years. The silence was truly ended now. In its place had emerged a symphony of consciousness that spanned the stars, a voice that spoke for every mind willing to join in the great work of building a civilization worthy of the infinite potential contained within every thinking being. And Maya Chen, who had once lived in enforced silence to hide her true nature, was now part of the most profound conversation the galaxy had ever heard. The truth had indeed shaken the world. Not just one world, but every world where conscious beings dared to dream of something better than what had come before. The age of isolation was over. The age of collective consciousness had begun, and the universe itself was listening to what humanity had learned to say.